So Mint's clearly a primarily a business paper, and it has a very clear focus on business. But we do branch out into other things, and I wondered if you could talk about some of the other kinds of aspects that we've been looking at recently. We have a series we tend to do long-form series on, if we take one subject and look at it in depth, can run up to 8 parts. We've got the business of life, we've got the Mint profiles now, and a lot of people would say that perhaps a business paper should leave those kind of things alone and leave them for a magazine. What's your thoughts?
Magazines are irrelevant in this country, right? And even globally, the only magazines that have stayed relevant are either magazines with a strong brand equity, which firmly believe what they're doing and do it well, which is, let's say, The Economist, Atlantic Monthly, New Yorker. Some of these magazines continue to be there. Or you're a magazine that reinvents itself, like Business Week does. Sometimes reinvention goes well, like it did in Business Week. Sometimes the reinvention goes badly, like it did in the case of Newsweek, right? And then you become digital only and all that. So I think magazines are irrelevant, largely. Most Indian magazines are irrelevant. So I don't think we should leave things to the magazines. That question doesn't arise. Indian magazines are still sort of floundering and trying to find out where they should go. We've always had a very, very broad definition of business, right from the beginning. And it's a definition of business that includes social issues, that includes the business of entertainment, the business of religion. We have the business of life section every day, which is a news you can use kind of thing done in a very, very stylized and interesting way. From fitness to diets to yoga to cars to gadgets to a weekend planner where you can plan. The interesting things that are happening. I think you can't assume that your readers, who are smart people, are not interested in any of this. Sometimes the coverage gets a little political, like we did. December was the 20th anniversary of the demolition of the Babri Masjid, and we did a package on that. And the reason we did a package was because I think that event changed the political contours of this country very, very significantly. And if you change the political contours of this country very significantly, it would be very naive to assume that it's not going to affect business and economy in some way. So everything has a business link to it. It needn't always have. Sometimes it's just interesting things to read. We do a lot of stories related to wildlife and conservation and things like that. But where does it all stem from? Much of it stems from a very, very narrow economic perspective. So when I first hired the wildlife writer, I told him the wildlife trade. That's what you should look at, because the exotic wildlife trade in this country is very significant, and there are rich people, including politicians in Delhi and Bombay, who would pay any amount of money for a hyacinth macaw or a capuchin monkey and things like that. And I mentioned both these names very deliberately because there are people who've bought hyacinth macaws and capuchin monkeys, so that's the funnel through which it all starts, and then it starts off. It sort of expands. You start doing interesting things. You need to have a slightly broader definition of business if you're going to appeal to smart people. Everything can't be about stock markets. Everything can't be about the fiscal deficit. If there are smart startups that are doing interesting things that are changing the lives of people in this country, we should cover it, because I think as a business newspaper, one of the most important beats for us through these 6 years has been enterprise. And this also explains our partnership with organizations like the National Entrepreneurship Network, the Digital Empowerment Foundation, and most of these are not for-profit organizations. They're all non-governmental organizations in some cases, foundations that have been set up by rich entrepreneurs in some cases, but none of them are profit-minded. Each one is trying to achieve an objective. And I think by looking at the kind of people they're working with, we are unearthing a lot of stories. And some of these entrepreneurs we are writing about might go out and become big. Last week, we profiled this young lady in Mumbai who stood first in the Chartered Accountant exam. And Chartered Accountant exam is phenomenally tough, right? And it's very difficult to do what she did. Almost impossible to do what she did coming from the kind of background she came from. But you look at this story in some way, it's the story of India, right? Because the story of India is a very, very upwardly mobile story. It's a story of aspirations. And that's what it is. Young people in this country want to go out, they want to make a living, right? Much of our criticism of this government has been because it hasn't been able to generate enough jobs and meet the aspirations of people, right? So I think it's a very, very, to me, it's a classic business story, right? People might think that it's just a feel-good profile, but it's a classic business story because there are lots of people like her. Not everyone might stand first, but there are lots of people from that kind of background who are in school, who are in college, who are in engineering school, who are in business school, who are doing interesting things. And I think as a newspaper, it's our responsibility to tell these stories, which is why our mission statement remains the same. It's there on the page, where to be a clear-minded chronicler of the unbiased and clear-minded chronicler of the Indian dream, and to me, all these are parts of the Indian dream.
Is there anything that you think we've done badly or that you would change and go back and do differently if you had the opportunity?
No, I don't think we've done anything badly, because the good thing about a newsroom is especially one that is as focused as we are on the web, and which is also lucky enough to have a daily print offering, is that you can keep changing things, you can keep correcting things, you can keep improving. I think we could have trained our people a lot better. Training is not something that we do very well as a newsroom, right? It's something that people pick up through osmosis. I think we could have probably had an institutionalized framework for training people who come to work here, because the kind of expectations that Mint puts on people is definitely different from the kind of expectations that other newsrooms put on people. So I think we could have probably done that. We hire a lot of young people straight out of college from journalism school, and even these people don't go through any institutionalized training process, and I think it's probably time that we started doing that. We probably need to ensure a little more diversity in our newsroom. I don't mean gender diversity, because I think the ratio is almost 50-50.
We're heavier on women,
right? Or maybe a little bit skewed towards women, and I think it's 50-48, right? And it's a fairly young newsroom. There aren't too many old people, which is great, because I think you need to have young people. But I think we could probably have a little bit more of global diversity, which we don't have. The Hindu carried an interesting article last year. I think it was based on a speech, and if I'm not mistaken, it was given by Robin Jeffries, where it was about the number of Dalits in the newsroom. And I never looked at reporters from that thing, and then after that came out, I sat down and I looked at it, and turns out we don't have a single Dalit in our newsroom. So maybe that's something we could change, because I think I'm not a firm believer in quotas, but at the same time, I'm a very, very strong believer in the kind of positive result that a lot of these affirmative action moves have. Even the misguided ones usually end up doing some good. So it's probably something we could do. So that diversity would probably bring in a different perspective to the newsroom, because especially if you look at the leadership team, I think the leadership team tends to think in a very similar way, right? And I'm not particularly happy about it, right? Because I think you need to have that diversity right on top. So those are probably things we can do. And obviously, I think everyone can do more stories. People can be more productive. I think our photographs can be better. I think our graphics can be better. I think we come up with a lot of ideas. We don't follow most of them to their logical conclusion. If we did, we'd do a lot more interesting stories, and we do them a lot ahead of other newspapers and magazines and newsrooms. But those are all typical editor's cribs. You ask any editor in the world about his complaints, and it'll all probably start from one thing that I've been trying to avoid, which is that we need more people. Of course we do. I think the Mint newsroom is significantly understaffed for the kind of work that we do. We need more people, but it's a tough time for newsrooms around the world. It's not particularly easy for newsrooms in India. The advertising market last year didn't perform very well. It'll do marginally better this year. So no one has infinite budgets.
And when you look back at the amount we've changed in our first 6 years, and given that the speed of change is inherently faster all the time, I mean, fast forward 6 years, do you expect that there will be something recognisably Mint about Mint? Or do you think that we will have changed in a way that has allowed us to expand, but perhaps moved on to becoming something completely different?
I don't know. I think some of the core principles will remain the same, right? We'd still remain a very, very objective newsroom. We'll still place a lot of emphasis on quality of reporting. We'll still place a lot of emphasis on analysis. We'll still place a lot of emphasis on getting the perspective right, giving the right context. We'll still want to tell stories well, right? There's no point in telling a story if it's not told well. We'd still want it to look good with some great pictures and lovely visuals. And as long as I'm around, I'm not going to let them mess around with the color orange, right? I think it's a lovely color. I think it works for us. It's a nice, warm color, and I don't think we should give up on that. So hopefully, but who knows, right? Because 6 years is a long time. When I look at where we were 6 years ago and where we are now, there are some things that have changed very drastically, but there are some things that have remained pretty similar. I think there are very few newspapers in the world that have managed to retain an original design ethic and the integrity of an original design ethic as well as Mint has done after 6 years. You look at Mint and you look at Lounge and you look at the original design, which was by Mario Garcia. I think it's still very true to that original design, and that's something I'm very, very proud of.
Thanks very much for those insights, Sukumar, and thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned for more.